Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's a man, goddamn.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases with Joel Goldberg. I am Joel Goldberg, and the podcast, as always, is presented by Community America Credit Union. I've got a nice show coming up for you and a really good discussion on leadership from the corporate level. But first and foremost, want to give a quick shout out to my friends and partners over at Chief of Staff. It's Chief of Staff Kansas City, although they place people all over the country. And so great connection to have, whether it's those that are out there looking for high-level jobs or employers as well. Making connections that matter. Chief of Staff Kansas City. You can check them out at chiefofstaffkc.com. Let's get to the episode right now. We got this. That's a few simple words with a powerful meaning. Depending on the metric, maybe it's the billions with a B of dollars in annual revenue they generate. It could also be the 1.7 million different products they represent, or if scaled down substantially, they could be traced to be the one man responsible for setting the tone from the top. Enter today's guest, Barry Litwin, the commercial strength CEO and ace of initiatives for worldwide supply distributor Global Industrial. He's a veteran e-commerce exec with an extensive knowledge of optimizing experiences for his consumers and his associates. With his focus kept firmly on best-in-class execution, Barry's award-winning leadership has enabled the company to not just survive, but actually thrive in recent years. It's a success few can attest to and proof that no matter what, he's got this. And I am excited right now to bring in Barry Litwin, a friend also. And in some ways I would say a friend of a friend, but sometimes when two people have the same mutual, really close friend, you end up getting to know each other a little bit. Yeah. I guess I could give a shout out to our mutual friend in just a moment. But first and foremost, you get first billing, not him. Barry, how are you?
I'm doing great. And Joel, it's great to see you, and really appreciate the opportunity to come on to your podcast and talk a little bit about leadership.
There's a lot to talk about, obviously, and you've been through it all. And I think too, we're always still learning it, no matter what level that we're at, and especially when you're dealing with the changing world that we're living in, and you've done that. Let me get the shout out right away, although I'm pretty sure that our mutual friend will listen to the whole podcast. If he doesn't, he should be admonished by both of us, because my longtime childhood friend, like almost a whole lifetime's worth, became very good friends with you over the years. Maybe some people might know him that deal with him as Dr. Matthew Lickerman to us. He's just our friend Matt. And he introduced us years ago. And so I think without that, you and I wouldn't be having this discussion. I felt like it was important to get that shout out. And you can take any shots you want at him, too.
That's a very nice shout out for him. That was good.
So anyway, we'll leave it at that. He taught us everything we know. No, that's not the case. But let's talk. I know that you got to know him when you guys were both living down in Florida, and you made the move to New York a number of years ago. Before we talk about your background and your past, you certainly have had a history of building cultures with big companies, and that was the case again right now. But let's talk a little bit about the company that you're with right now, and then we'll get into a little bit of what you guys do and the challenges. But tell me about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Joe. Global Industrial, is a publicly held organization, about $1.1 billion, and we're a leader in the industrial and MRO product space. So we help companies like manufacturers and retailers, transportation companies, as well as other verticals like healthcare and multifamily. We help organizations really move materials and enable them to operate each day in their business. We really focus quite a bit on back office supplies. We enable warehouses to run efficiently. We sell pallet jacks, and we sell pallet racking, and we sell garbage cans. I mean, anything you can imagine when you walk into the back of a warehouse or a manufacturing center, we're providing many of those consumable supplies, wire shelving and steel hoppers to move materials. It's an incredible assortment of product, and it just continues to keep getting better and better. And we actually have our own private brand products as well under the Global Industrial brand name. And we also have a line of furniture products under the Interion brand. And we also have a line of very solid wire shelving products from a brand called Nexel. So we've been very successful. The company's been around for 70 years. And we are both in North America, both the US and Canada. And we continue to be growing. I took on the role as CEO back in 2019 and run really from strategy to execution, all facets of the company. And we serve about 500,000 different customers in our business. So it's a terrific company. And like I said, we've been striving and thriving, over the last several years with the challenges, the economy has brought. But we've been doing really well.
Yeah, and those challenges, of course, we're all dealing with them in whatever we do in every walk of life, especially with the pandemic. And this as a leader, the economy always changes, and sometimes it's election to election, or sometimes it is something like 9/11 or the pandemic. So you're wired to handle that. What also interests me, though, too, is that you have made those moves to different companies. And I always love asking guests this. I remember one of my favorite podcast interviews, and he's out of Kansas City, is the CEO of H&R Block, and he had come from Uber and Target. And I'm always fascinated when someone jumps into a big company like that, what day one is like, and then going from there, because all eyes are on you. It's not, and it's not all about the guy on the top,
Mm-hmm.
but it starts there, as I said in the intro as well. So when you made this move in 2019, what were you looking to do? And how do you do that when you're starting fresh and you've got to be able to build that trust?
Yeah, it's great. I had a little bit of a head start. I was running a consumer electronics company before Global Industrial, and I had the ability to sit on the board of directors of Global for 2 years before I really took over the helm at the CEO role. So I was really impressed with the organization, with its history. And as I would sit as a board member, a lot of ideas started to flow through my head about where the organization was going. And my background kind of spans both consumer retail and business to business, which is somewhat unique. A lot of individuals, they'll stay in the consumer world for a long time, or they'll stay in B2B. And I've had the ability to cross over in those segments because of my background in e-commerce and digital for so long. And for a long time, the digital world really hadn't caught up in the business to business context. It was moving fast ahead in consumer retail, as Amazon came in, and companies were under threat like Best Buy and others who had to quickly react to this changing world that Amazon was, disrupting. So I had spent a number of years with large retailers kind of navigating through that. In the business to business world, like industrial companies and healthcare supply companies, really didn't feel that pressure for a long time. But I think by the time 19 came around, I started to really see where Amazon was making a presence into the B2B world. And this was a great opportunity to take some of the advantages of Global Industrial and start to put together a formalized strategy to start shift it and double down into the e-commerce space, as well as improve its overall multi-channel model. So it started with, kind of hearing from the team and the executives on the sidelines, so to speak, and then starting to, in my mind, put together a strategy where I felt the organization needed to go. And I thought the differentiator for us long-term was to focus on the customer experience, because everything in the world, how people were shopping and buying, they were buying online, they were going into retail as a showroom. It was all about the experience and the brand. And I felt that was a great position for this company to really kind of own and build an organization around, build it around the customer experience. And that's really where ACE was born out of, and where our approach came. So had some time sitting on the sidelines to kind of contemplate my ideas, and then, decided to come into the organization. And I've been doing it since 2019.
It's a good thing that you started in 2019, not say later in 2020, which was the case for some. I mean, one of my guests on the show, who's the CEO of a major insurance broker, his his first day as CEO, and he had been with the company, but his first day as CEO was I think May of 2020, and his first day of CEO was at home.
Yeah.
As it was his second day, his third day, his fourth day, and he spent all that time just meeting with people on Zoom and listening. And so I was curious about two things. One, how did the world that you just talked about, and it is always about the consumer, but how much did that change once the pandemic hit? And how are you able to adjust to that? And then second, how did your leadership change during the pandemic?
Oh, two great questions, Joel. First, I think from a consumer perspective, people were locked into their house. We were in a, worldwide shutdown as far as the economy was concerned. And I think what happened was the trajectory of online buying, which had been creeping up as a percentage of overall retail sales for over a decade, had taken a very sharp turn upwards because people didn't have the willingness to go out and shop in stores. So the online adoption went up, I think, about 35, 40% in one shot. And it assumed a big piece of the overall retail sales. And I think as it did that, it also had another dynamic on people. They started to realize that this online shopping thing is actually really, really easy. It's really good. And I save a lot of time by staying at home on commodity products, just buying items. So I think it was a major catalyst for improvement. E-commerce was already growing, but I think it was a major catalyst for change in most people's day-to-day buying habits, buying everything from diapers to cars and you name it. So I think that was a big change. On the leadership front, Joel, that was a massive change as well. And I think that most companies, particularly when I was in consumer and retail, remote was a little bit more acceptable. If you're into technology space, consulting, it was easy. You were remote in many cases and you're traveling. But in the industrial industry, MRO industry, it wasn't commonplace. It was a little bit more old school. The view of productivity was to keep people in seat. I always call it butts in seats management. Mm-hmm. If I see you, I can see how productive you're being. So when the pandemic hit, it really required us to go remote very quickly. And from my standpoint, we're now in an era of truly hybrid work environment. Whether we go back to, people kind of operating in an office 5 days a week. I mean, there's a few companies out there doing it, but they're really the minority. So I think from my standpoint, being able to operate the company, in most cases, and I like to walk around, I like to travel to our facilities, I like to be on the floor. Not having that ability for a little while did force me to change my style. It became everything around Zoom, and how we communicate and engage with associates changed too. So we changed a lot of our operating practices. We changed our meeting structure. I've actually told people at times that, managing in today's age through Zoom is much like watching streaming TV. When we sit home at night, right, we may pop on Netflix or Hulu or what have you, right? But in today's world, for most operators, who have businesses all over on our hybrid environment, you're clicking Zoom, 3 to 4 times a day into major meetings. You're watching, you're communicating. So the style that people present today has changed. The power of presentation, the power of communication, all of that has taken on and required a different skill set. And from a CEO perspective, you actually have to be engaged online. You can't keep your video closed off, when you're online. You got to be present, just like you would be in the workplace. So I think most leaders, most CEOs have definitely had to been, have forced that type of change. And I don't think that's something that's going to go away. I think it's going to be with us permanently.
I think it's an interesting point too, because I haven't led a company obviously like you, but being a speaker, and you're a speaker as well, that world has pivoted at times, for a while fully, and now at times to virtual. And I think there's still that stigma to some that said, well, I don't want to do that. It's not the real thing. And I recognize that it's different, but sometimes it has to be the real thing. And I also feel like it opens up some doors that maybe weren't there, some connections that you can have that you might not have been able to do. And so that might just be the optimist in me of saying, let's find the silver lining and let's make the best of it. And because there are enough out there, I think there's a lane created. There are enough out there that are so against it or down on it or pessimistic, that those that are willing to embrace it when it's when it works or when it's available or makes sense, end up coming out ahead. And I'm curious how you approach that, because as someone that liked to be able to walk around the floor, that someone that liked to be able to see their people face to face, you had to do it in a different way. And I think that there are one of two ways you can go with that. You could either embrace it or you could kind of look down on it.
Yeah, you have to embrace it. And I think the worst thing that you can do is to not participate in the various rooms and chambers throughout your organization that are going on each day. I think how you show up in a typical meeting for CEO or SVP executive level is really important. I think the people that are on the call, right, they're there to kind of talk about status or talk about a great project they're doing, whether it's loyalty or whether it's building a distribution center, whether it's creating a modification in your computer system. I mean, all sorts of things that happen every day. And they have to feel that you're really engaged in what they're doing, and they have to feel that they matter. And so, I have seen in certain scenarios where, people will keep their video off, and I will encourage them to be present, because in our environment, in a remote environment, hybrid remote environment, that's the only thing you got, a telephone and Zoom. And so I think that it forces leaders to change. We talk about these things in the company. I like to have a policy where people have to be on camera, when they're in meetings, and just like you would in a meeting room.
Yeah.
So it's requiring a different skill set. It's requiring executives to show up differently. You show your encouragement, recognition, empathy. All those things can be delivered online, and it's important to do it. And I think for some executives who really like being behind a closed door and not being out engaged, it's troublesome. And I think it's going to reflect on the type of talent that companies are going to look for. It's I always say, there's a lot of 2 and 3 dimensional leaders and players. There's not a lot of 5-tool players, and I think you got to be a 5-tool player in today's environment.
Love the baseball analogy or reference there to the 5-tool baseball player. And I think that's interesting. I've thought about that a little bit in terms of turning the camera on, and I get it. It's comfortable to turn it off for people. It's comfortable. Look, we all know that we're on meetings and we've got multiple browsers open, and we're sometimes half paying attention. But I mean, shoot, you can wear shorts. You don't have to have the pants on and all of that. You're already getting from here up. Like, at least just show that part and be a little bit engaged. And there still is something about being able to see someone. I mean, like even right now, this podcast is an audio podcast. We do put it out on YouTube, but the bulk of the audience, as I told you, is on audio. But no matter what it is, I prefer to have that visual so that you and I could have that eye contact. It's a different conversation than what, say, a radio interview would be. And I think that's what's happened with the digital or with the video world in terms of Zoom meetings and all of that as well.
Well, people are, I think in today's world, particularly in, the use of video content and how, kids and millennials are utilizing social media and access to, Instagram Live, utilizing Facebook, Snapchat. We're in a visual medium world. And I don't think that is separate from how corporations need to reach their constituency and their customers. I think that companies that are really successful understand that their brand is not just, sitting there on the side of a truck or even just on an advertisement at a baseball stadium. I mean, they are into social media. They are onto YouTube. And that's where the eyeballs are. So I think from our standpoint, when you think about it from a marketing and selling perspective, at least with global, we have a very, very broad reach. We've got a car this year. We got a partnership with NASCAR. We're going to be at the Daytona 500 this weekend with our brand. Our team is there. We provide a lot of social play, with those imageries because people want to see what's actually happening. And so I think I think the branding and marketing all ties, but I think the executive presence and how you show up in the organization also is part of the organization's brand. And it speaks to the culture of the organization about how you go about things. And I think CEOs have to have that mindset, when they go into leadership roles, not just about sitting behind looking at financials, although, I do plenty of that. But I think the real impact to cultural change and getting organizations moving down a certain path is how you participate, visually in the organization, and how you can drive clarity of goals and purpose, on a day-to-day basis. And it actually is very efficient electronically. I actually enjoy it.
Great perspective. I want to shift to my baseball themed questions. I know you're a baseball guy. I want to get into that in a little bit too, but let's start with the home run. Professionally speaking, in your long career as an executive and as a leader, what's the biggest home run that you've hit?
Well, that's a good one, Joel. I will tell you, and I don't want to, as for the fear of being redundant, but I really look back and I think about the 2020 pandemic. It was really kind of our Apollo 13 moment, and I think it was for most executives and anyone that's probably listening to your podcast. But skillfully guiding the company, through that period as an essential business, and being able to come out on top with some record financial performance was really quite a year. And most importantly, seeing the organization at the time engaged and energized, by the way my management team showed empathy and care for our associates during that time. For us having to move to a remote work environment, within hours, when we never did that before. And learning as an organization how to operate and execute electronically through Zoom and other means, it totally broke barriers. It knocked down the old stigma on the best ways to ensure productivity, by looking at somebody in their seat, during the old days. So it was really kind of a make or break moment for us in terms of what we could accomplish as the team. And I kind of look at, over the, not just 2020, but, 21 as well. We had spent a lot of time on our culture. We had done a number of surveys with associates through Comparably and other groups like that. I was fortunate to get, CEO of the year in 20 and 21. And when I look back at it, it really wasn't so much what I did. It was really more about how associates really voted on how they felt, during that period, and how our management team responded to the needs and the support and the empathy. That's really what they were responding to. I felt like this company was backing me during this time, and they accommodated their workplace practices, which were, very different from how we're operating today. So, between the care packages we sent people, between, the swag we provided individuals, the constant meetings, the constant updates, the constant, video town halls on a weekly basis, it was fun to see the organization rally. And I think that was a big home run moment for me. And I also think that I learned a ton from it that I'm certainly carrying forward and, for the future. And I think most executives and CEOs, anyone listening to your podcast, is probably feeling similarly about that time.
Well, it's been fascinating to me to hear just the different, and I think the best companies have come up with, it's not just a swag bag. It's not just but just finding ways to stay connected. And one day it might be the swag bag. One day it might be the town hall, but just making sure people know that they matter and that they're being taken care of and that they haven't been forgotten even at a distance. And the other thing, and then I'll get to my next baseball theme question that I have talked about, I was about ready to say it, and then you kind of stole the words from me, is having that culture piece in advance enabled you to do what you had to do. Because I believe that if you're first trying to build a culture or fix a culture when all hell breaks loose or whatever happens, like a pandemic, it's a pretty tough time to first build that culture. But if you have that culture, then you can adapt to that change that is needed. But to do both of those at the same time, I think is pretty impossible.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think in 2019, we had established the first formal strategy for the company. We had built kind of clear purpose, clear objectives for the organization. I think that helped, prior to going into the pandemic, building more accountability, communication around where we are as a business, recognizing associates along the way. So once we, effectively went out of the office, you're right. It definitely helped us.
All right. How about a swing and a miss for you? And what did you learn from it?
Swing and a miss. I mean, I almost look at it as, it's not necessarily one major event, in my professional career that was really a big swing and a miss. I think like most corporate executives, it's never a straight line up. It's filled with a lot of jagged points in it. It's really been more of for me, a stair-step cascade of kind of planning, executing, reacting, and taking some, well thought out risks along the way. I've certainly moved and lived in different environments, and that's kind of par for the course today. But I'm somebody that usually has some pretty well thought out plans and strategies on how to improve companies pretty quickly. But I do live by the quote from Mike Tyson, who said, "Everyone's got a plan until they get hit in the face." And I love that quote because it really is very true. Expect the unexpected. As good as something looks, something's gonna come around the bend. So my career has really been, a series of daily and weekly adjustments, for programs and concepts that didn't work, trying to understand why, and having the persistence to change course and continue on. And I'll give you one example. Years ago, I was running e-commerce for a very large retailer, $25 billion, and my team and I decided we were going to build the first iPhone and Android app for the company. And our companies in our space weren't quite there yet. We were really on the forefront of it. And, we assembled a small skunkworks team of developers, and we launched it and took a leadership position at the time in the space. And it was really exciting. We got a lot of press for it. And, but as a team, we really felt good about it. So I got asked to come into the board of directors and, this big company and present, what we did. And all I got was really questioning, why did we spend the time on this? Why did we spend the money on this? We're not going to sell any more products on mobile devices in 3 years than we are now. And I always look back, and 2 years later, the organization released a press statement that they generated over $100 million in sales off those platforms. So, the learning for me was, continue to innovate in the face of opposition. If you don't, your competitor's gonna. And that's been a moment for me that I've always learned from. It was kind of bittersweet, great accomplishment, but organization wasn't necessarily accepting. And then years later, it turned out to be a big home run.
And the reason why I always love that swing and miss question is, in baseball terms, players have to make adjustments at every moment, at bat to at bat, pitch to pitch. And when you can make those adjustments, learn from the mistakes, or read what's going on, it oftentimes can lead to that home run, as you're talking about. Final baseball themed question. This is the one that I wrote my first book on, small ball. It's my favorite topic because, simply put, it's the little things that you do every day that add up to the big results. It really originated for me in two parts. One, I had watched the team that I traveled with and covered and still do, the Royals, win a championship in a small market, not being the big dollar home run hitting team. So they had to do it with the sacrifices and the base stealing and the defense, none of which shows up on our highlights at the end of the day. Usually ours will do it a little bit more, but they're not showing up on SportsCenter. But to me, it was also a culture question. And what had happened when I got to Kansas City in 2008, and I remember talking to their GM, who's still their GM or now president. I said, "What are you trying to do?" He said, "I'm trying to build a culture." Now, they were the laughing stock of baseball at that point. There was no identity. There was nothing. And he built that culture. Small ball to me is your culture. It's your identity. And so that's just a little bit of my explanation. I throw that out there every now and then. And then, of course, it could be anything. What is small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the big results?
Yeah, I think that was a great example, Joel, that you gave. And I think small ball is really how you win. It's the blocking and tackling. It's every day. It's the execution. It's paying attention to the little things. And there's a few areas that I think are really important, that I think provide kind of an extra edge for executives that want to play small ball and have a good game. I think communication. We talked about that before. I think in the remote hybrid environment, having a real appreciation for visual and verbal communication, I think it's a prerequisite for how you're going to keep associates engaged in an organization. I mean, we're in an era right now where they call it the Great Resignation, and people are looking, and looking over the corner and saying, "Where do I go?" But I also find when you build a great culture, people go, and then I find that they want to come back because they actually liked what they had because the culture was really good. So it's easy for CEOs to get caught up behind the numbers and behind the spreadsheets, given the pressure of, Wall Street investors and shareholders. But you got to be willing to communicate. You got to be taking the time in your calendar to be able to say, what group didn't I talk to? Who can I go give a pat on the back to? Who can I go energize? That's like the job of a baseball manager. You got to be in the game. And you got to be, in my mind, you have to build a emotional connection with the employees. And you've got to have the energy to stay in front of employees, whether it's Zoom, social media, on site. You got to be committed. And I absolutely believe, when the organization sees the CEO committed in all the different channels, and it's authentic, you can't be committed at those levels if it's not authentic. I absolutely believe that is what helps create a positive culture. And when you're telling everybody what the score is and how we're getting there and how they fit, that really translates to great retention in an organization. And I think we've been able to do that, for the last couple of companies I've been with that style. I think the third area that's really important for the individuals that I think leaders have to continue to realize is that, and this kind of affects both life and career. It's the key to happiness is feeling like you're making progress. And when you understand that, people's major drive, motivational drive, is for them to actually feel like they're making progress, that can make the difference between somebody feeling good coming into the day and somebody who feeling like, this isn't a place for me. So when people work for a company, it's big or small, they got to feel that their work has meaning and that it's being noticed. I find when people are being highlighted for their work, when they're being paid attention to, and generally recognized for what they're doing, sometimes good and bad, the retention rate and happiness factor increases. And I think that's why over the last 3 years, we've accelerated our overall engagement rates in the company, because I demand that of not only of my senior vice presidents in the organization, but I wouldn't ask them to do anything that I wasn't willing to do. And I stay in front of the associates on a regular basis. And I think it's important. It's almost, a requirement for the CEO. So, how folks are paid today, in the compensation they demand, obviously that's really important. But that feeling of that raise goes away really quick. And then they start asking themselves the question, is this the environment that I see myself working in for 5 years? Is this, so if the culture gets stale, people leave.
Yeah.
And I think the CEO has to realize that every year it's a new slate. It's like a new season, right? With baseball, you can't worry about, you missed the playoffs last year, get it out of your head. You got a new season, you got a chance to excel today. And that's kind of how you have to think about the business. So to me, those are the intangibles, Joel. Those are the intangibles that I think the small ball in terms of the basics of the accounting and the numbers, you got to have that in order to be in the game. But it's the intangibles that allow you to separate from the pack and make you better.
There's so much in there. I think the quote that stands out to me, if I wrote it down right, is the key to happiness is progress, because we all want to know that we're making a difference. We all want to know that we're contributing. And I also think I've talked to so many executives about the Great Resignation, and so many have become focused on everybody that's leaving or how do you keep them. And sometimes they might leave, but the way that you treat them, even in their departure, may bring them back, because oftentimes they go elsewhere and they understand this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or I don't have what I had at Global Industrial. And so, there is always a mental equity that is being built at any given moment that will show itself later on. And so it sounds like that's everything that you guys are doing. I have 4 final questions that I call rounding the bases. They'll oftentimes be lighthearted. And, when we have a good mutual friend, that means that I get intel, which is good. So I'll start with this. You've got a little bit of a baseball background yourself. Give me the scouting report of a young Barry Litwin as a college pitcher.
Tremendous fastball, curveball that just drops off the table. And it can be a little wild at times. But you're going to get a high strikeout ratio, but you're going to walk a few guys along the way.
Lefty or righty?
Left-handed.
Oh, okay. All the better, right? Because, they always need a bunch of those. Okay.
Could have had a better changeup.
But if you're lefty, at least you hopefully get the label of crafty lefty. Although if you have a good fastball, you might not be crafty. So you have more talent than me, that's for sure. At least in terms of baseball, because what I got from our mutual friend Matt Lickerman, who, I'd mentioned you guys live near each other. We're good friends, great family friends, wives, kids, all that in Florida. It actually started in Chicago, and of course that's where I grew up with Matt. And I was asking for some, scouting report type of stuff or some fun questions to ask. and he said something to me about how your basketball game resembled mine. And that is not a compliment, I don't think. Maybe it is a little bit, but I grew up playing basketball with him and his older brothers and dad in their driveway every Sunday morning. And I was just a bruiser. I was the rebounder that had not a whole lot of grace, but a lot of intensity. So I don't know if he's lumping us together, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, basketball I have been a fan favorite of basketball. It's I love the NBA. I love college basketball. I spent my undergraduate years at Indiana University. Bob Knight was a coach at that time. So, I love college basketball. My kids go to, a couple of big powerhouse sports schools. So I like living vicariously through them at this point. But playing basketball, not my thing. I was not there. I had some of the height to play and definitely the strength, but it was not it's not my forte.
We're Big Ten guys, and I went to Wisconsin, and I was not an athlete, but in my early years as a television intern before getting into the business, I could tell you there was no game that I wanted to cover more than when Indiana came to Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Not because of the matchup, but because I just sat there transfixed with Bobby Knight on the sidelines. By the way, I will tell you, the only person in my now 28-year career on television that has ever walked off on me in the middle of a live interview was Bobby Knight.
That's amazing, but not surprising, though, is it?
Not surprising, right? All right, we'll get back to some somewhat more serious stuff, although there is a basketball reference in here. My third question, as we round the bases, a global industrial one, and saw a couple of the initiatives that you have. One that you call R3, the other one called ACE, and I just found them interesting. The basketball, at least here, R3, restore, return, rebound, and then ACE, accelerating the customer experience. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, the ACE strategy is really our corporate foundational strategy that's built around, really 5 key pillars. It focuses on improving the overall digital and selling process for the organization. The second one talks about the expansion of overall products and improvement in our private brand position in the market. Third really centers around becoming an expert source for information. So we're not just a product company, we're actually helping operations professionals do their job through knowledge and intelligence. We've got different website properties that provide a lot of content, and people that are experts in OSHA, things like that can help. And that's really one of the third pillars. Operational excellence, that's how we deliver products through 7 DCs across the North America. And certainly the final is really around everything we do in the company to provide the right customer experience. And that's by through automation and reduction of friction in different processes we have in the business, whether it be customer service, whether it be credit, anything that creates a pause in how customers are being serviced. We look to automate that and try to deliver some type of digital solution to increase the speed of that. And that really makes up the ACE strategy. So that was established. We've had that running for, we're going on through 3 years at this point. The other topic you brought up around R3 was actually a marketing strategy that we had implemented during the pandemic. When you're selling pallet jacks and pallet racking and steel hoppers and garbage cans during the pandemic, nobody was there to use that stuff. So we started selling things that were things like masks and sanitizer. And what we realized is that we produce a lot of products that can actually help companies restore their environments. So when they came back to work, they would need things such as partitions, which we sold to separate different cubicles, cabinetry that they might use to house pandemic-related products, plexiglass screens that people would use in the office. So R3 was, really how to return and restore your environment in this new world, coming back, and how our certain segments of our product line could adopt to that. It was very successful during the time.
Okay, last question, my walk-off. I'll ask you to break out your crystal ball, although when I say that, it makes me think of Bobby Knight's longtime friend, Tony La Russa, who used to say, I don't have a crystal ball. What do you want me to do? Look into the future? But in terms of business, in terms of your world, we've already established it's always changing. I'm not asking you to predict what the next game changer is. We don't know what pandemic or whatever it is around the corner, but something will happen. It always does. Where's the industry going? Where do we go post pandemic? How does everything change?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think hybrid's going to stay with us for a long, long time. I think people have gotten accustomed to being able to do their work both home and at the office. I think hoteling will end up being a much bigger concept for in-office environments where you don't necessarily take a permanent office. You might come in, plug in for a couple days, and then plug back out and go home. So I see that environment changing, quite a bit going forward. So in terms of the work environment, I think it's going to become more flexible and a little bit what I would consider kind of a hybrid going forward. Other areas that are going to take a huge dominance in the marketplace is going to be the continued evolution of artificial intelligence. Certainly in the business world, that is going to create algorithms and computer code that is going to help automate a lot of day-to-day functions in corporate life. It's having a big impact on the business today. You're seeing AI helping salespeople. You're seeing it helping determine what prices to sell at. You're seeing it determine where to put products in a warehouse. So artificial intelligence is probably one of the fastest growing and probably most impactful areas that we're going to see over the next decade. And I think it's just going to evolve even more. And from a macro perspective, it's ever changing. Right now, our biggest challenge is the supply chain pandemic that's occurring in 21 and continuing through 22. Particularly with a company like us, where we sell almost half of our product portfolio is our own brand product that comes from overseas. It's definitely had an impact on the ability to, stock the right products and being able to sell, but we've been masterfully working through it. But I think, when that supply chain starts to free up, I think other things in the economy will start to improve. We may see some softness in the inflationary areas that, are facing the country right now. And certainly geopolitical issues are, constantly under threat, and what's going to happen there as well. So, I think as a CEO, you have to follow all of it. You have to follow the trends. You have to know what's happening today and how to adjust your business, both in the short term and build the strategies for the near and long term. And that's what you get trained to do after a while. So that's what makes the job fun. So I love what you do.
You never know. It's like me in the sports world too. And the beauty of it, good and bad, you never quite know what the result is going to be every single day, but something's going on, and you've got to be able to adapt to it at a much higher level. For you, you're running a massive company and doing it so well with that leadership from the top. The website for anyone that is interested in Global Industrial, quite simple, globalindustrial.com. You can learn more about everything that they do there. Barry, it's been a great podcast from a personal standpoint. Fun to hear a little bit of that stuff with our mutual connection, but even more importantly than that is just to be able to get all of your perspectives on leadership and change and innovation and this world that we live in. I really, really appreciate you spending the time today. And I hope to see you sometime this summer when the Royals are at Yankee Stadium, and we'll catch up in New York.
That'd be great, Joel. I really appreciate taking the time to talk today and having me on your show. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks.